So this morning we're talking about math intervention and specifically around how we plan based on data. We're going to help you answer one question of where do we start with math intervention? So we're glad to have you here this morning. To reiterate, we are the DLC and we're a nonprofit organization that connects teachers and leaders with professional learning resources and networks that improve outcomes for diverse learners and hopefully increase teacher retention and how we're able to sustain and persist in this work. This morning, like I said, we're going to come up with 1 to 2 next best steps for planning what your math intervention should look like. We're going to start with setting the stage, why it's important, where do you start, what does a weekly schedule look like, and then some tips and resources. We have a bunch of those to share with you this morning.
All right.
So Josh is going to take it away for us.
Thank you, Brooke. So what challenge are we trying to solve? First one, students have obviously difficulty accessing grade level standards if they have a lot of gaps in their learning. And the students with significant gaps clearly have these foundational math skills that they've not mastered, which is making it harder to access those grade level standards. The third thing is there's no scope and sequence for math intervention. And that makes it incredibly hard to plan for and know what to do next. And so we're going to talk about one way or some ways you can develop, in essence, your own scope and sequence. So where do I start? This is our question. And should I be focusing on grade level standards or prerequisite standards? Like, what should be my priorities? So this is a storyboard from a movie. This is going to be similar to math intervention. So imagine you have the storyboard. I didn't tell you what the story is about. I actually cut up the pieces and you had them all out of order. And I said, all right, you'll tell me where it starts and where it ends. Like, it would be just really difficult to do that. And I think math intervention can oftentimes be that. We need to essentially know what the story is about and where we're going in order to really put together a coherent picture. This was actually from Lion King, but if you can tell. So Yogi Berra says, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. So before we can answer what are we going to teach or where to start, I should say, we need to know where we're going. So we're going to start pretty zoomed out, and over the course of our time, we're going to zoom in and get a little more detailed. So we're going to start with guiding principles. We're pretty zoomed out at this point, but we need a compass to know where we're going. So we're going to then get into sort of a week at a glance to just give you an example of what a weekly schedule could look like that's aligned with these guiding principles. We're not going to get into unit planning or lesson planning or anything like that. We're just going to be, it's only 15 minutes, so we're going to get through the first 2. So why do we need these? So guiding principles, which are based on research, should influence our behaviors and how we spend our time. So our weekly and daily schedule should be backed up by something, right? And so our behaviors and how we spend our time will be what drives our scholars' performance. So more than anything, the quote there on the right, more than anything we say, how we spend our time reveals our true priorities. So how do we figure out what our priorities should be? So these math intervention guiding principles, or I didn't come up with them, but reached out to some experts here, developed by Achievement Network and Student Achievement Partners that does the website Achieve the Core, which we'll be looking at. There's 10 of them. It's like 10 what not to do and 10 what to do for math intervention. 10 was a lot. And so just distilled, took 5 of those and distilled them down into 4. So this is what's going to help us know what's most important. And they say, you need to focus on major work standards, prioritize the most essential prerequisite skills that are aligned to that major work. And then essentially, they even talk about, if you can, help them with understanding upcoming content. So actually get into some pre-teaching. And just so you know, I did mention at the beginning, of course, you'll have the PowerPoint. We'll send out the PowerPoint deck. All the links are embedded in here. So the second thing that they talk about is making sure that we're connecting learning experiences in intervention with universal instruction. If it's totally disconnected, what you're doing in math intervention and gen ed class, they're not going to retain it. By linking them together, they're actually going to reinforce each other, and they'll learn both better. So how do we know then how to prioritize? Where do we find the major work? This is by far my favorite document. If you've seen it, it's Achieve the Core focused document. They have them through K through 8. So sorry, Ryan, in high school, they don't have that, but they have some other resources I can point out. But it's K through 8. And we're going to start here on the right, still pretty zoomed out. This is the highlights of major work for each grade band and each grade. So I've just blown it up here. For sake of today, this conversation, we're going to assume we're looking at a 5th grade student. Okay. So what I'm looking for is what is by the end of the year, this 5th grade student need to do well. And it's here, multiplication and division of whole numbers and fractions. So I know by far the bulk of my work this year is going to be focused on that, helping this group or this student multiply and divide whole numbers and fractions. So back here, so we've got that. Well, now what's most important for this specific grade level? It also calls that out. And in this case, we're looking for green. Green is good. If it's a green, that's called a major cluster. The key is right here. That's the major work of the grade that we mentioned in our guiding principles. The supporting clusters, which are blue, you can spend time on them, but I would make it definitely a minority of your time. I would not spend much time on the supporting clusters. By far the most of your time should be the major clusters. And sort of which of those to start with, if this is a 5th grade group, I know that my work needs to really explicitly link to these two. 5 NBTA, which is understand the place value system, and the NTB there, perform operations with multi-digit whole numbers. And the great thing about that is it's also going to support this major work that the highlights for the grade level, the grade band. So it's going to support that work. People often say, well, how much do I need to cover? My advice is to do fewer things well, right? And so instead of doing the mile wide, inch deep, I've actually seen teachers spend a good bulk of a semester on 2 clusters. And because there's a lot of standards and skills embedded within that. And so they're getting really good, doing a lot of word problems, applying those concepts, and students really master it. But I definitely want to get some into fractions. And maybe that's, in this case, the 2nd semester. Clearly the pace is going to be different depending on the group and the students. So the last thing on this document is, okay, I know I need to spend some time on math fluency and building up their fluency. So what is most of my time going to be spent on at grade level? It tells you right there. You got 1 standard, multi-digit multiplication is going to be the focus for this group. So back to guiding principles. So we've talked about how to find the major work for a grade. We've talked about how to connect learning experience and intervention and universal instruction. I just like the fluency example would be one link there, right? So how do you find the prerequisite skills? Because this is the hard part. And clearly the further back a student is from a grade level, the harder it becomes. So we're going to give you 2 scenarios, one that's close to grade level and one that's further back. So we got a 5th grade student. This student's a year to year and a half behind grade level. We're not quite sure. So the first thing I need to do is say, all right, what standard am I focusing on? So I click on this document. Again, these are all embedded in here. Go back to the 5th grade one we just talked about. And I know I'm starting with 5 NBTA, right? So go back to here. So now I'm going to use Achieve the Core's coherence map. If you're familiar with this, but it's a beautiful thing. So I'm going to 5th grade. And I know agreement is 5 NBT. So I'm clicking in here. And here we are, 5 NBTA. So now I'm going to actually map the standard, because this student, again, is a year to year and a half. So they're really closer to 4th grade. So here's the standard, and out to the left, it's going to show me all the prerequisite standards. It's a beautiful thing. Which one do you start with? Just start with the first one up. In this case, 4 NBTA, which definitely aligns with that. If you see a blue, That's a supporting cluster. So again, green is good. You're looking for green. So I'd actually go back to 4 MBTA1, and this is if you're trying to say like, okay, is this really the right spot to start? They actually have like a little assessment item from it. This one's Smarter Balance, which is like 10 ready. Anyway, it's an assessment kind of like 10 ready. So you could click on that. It's one item and give them that almost like as a pre-assessment. And I'll show you some other ways to give like pre-assessments. So that's, yeah, this Achieve the Core, there's actually some tasks that can become lessons as well. So it's a really great resource. So now I know it's 4 MBTA. Again, I mentioned this, teach the major standards as green ones before teaching the blue ones. If the student's still struggling, a lot of times we'll say like, we need to go back to early standard. I'll just put out there push that can really consider using those concrete materials. If you're being more abstract and just using pictures and the student's still struggling, before you go back, make sure you have those concrete materials and you get a lot of practice in that. Because once you introduce those, a lot of times students can get it and see the concept and can do the abstract work. So here's a different 5th grade student. So now the student's 2 to 3 years behind. What do I do with this? It gets a little harder. I'm actually not going to recommend that you go straight to the coherence map and just keep going back, because it gets so confusing. Like it's easy to get lost. So identify the grade band major work, which we'd know is that 5 NBT. I'm not going to go into that. Also know from some other assessment data, let's say, it could be universal screener. Hopefully you have more than one data point that, okay, the students between, the 2nd and 3rd grade. It's rare that I get sometimes just one number. So I'm going to go to let's just start with 3rd grade. I'm going to start with the higher grade. So here's a focus standard or focus document. And the first one up that's green is 3OA. So I'm going to go into, and I've linked it in here, the coherence map. Here's 3OA. I'm going to map that standard, and here I am. So again, you're not quite sure if it should be here at 3OA or their 2nd grade. Again, I'm probably going to get some sort of pre-assessment to do like a mini assessment for this grade level. Again, there's one down here. There's extra lessons, and there's some assessment items you could give them. If you find out, you know what, this is still too much. I need to I can track back 1 grade level. I don't know if you could see that, but the first one and the 3rd one here are blue, the supporting clusters. So I'm ignoring those, and I'm just going to go to 2 MBTA, and this is where I'm going to start. Okay. I know I'm going pretty fast. Certainly add questions to the chat if you can, and then we'll get to those toward the end. So not sure which one. I have linked in here if you're not familiar with Assessments. It's a great free resource. And it works really well if you're using Google Classroom, because you can just automatically assign things to Google Classroom from it. Khan Academy also has assessments, and even Achieve the Core has some pre-tests you can give. So this is my tip earlier. I was super passionate about it. Again, if you're picking between 2 different grade levels, start with the higher grade level, but then give students lots of practice with the concrete. You don't necessarily always have to go back. I think sometimes we're just teaching it in an abstract way, and so they can't get it. But as soon as we add that concrete in, that they can access it. All right, so I got to move along. So next we're going to go down a level, zoom in a little bit. So I can identify the major work and the prerequisite standards, but like, what does that look like within the context of the week? Because I think, like, how do you put all the pieces together? Here's an example. This is not universal, and this is, again, taking the 5th grade student as an example. So notice here on Monday, it says grade level, because from the guiding principle, so I need to link what I'm doing in small group. So I've seen a lot of impact. If you actually say, like, what's one lesson, the most important lesson from this week that's going to be happening in grade level, and I'm going to pre-teach that. And what we've seen is students that really struggle with math or many years behind, once they get to that gen ed class, they're actually able to participate, raise their hand, ask questions, and give up the answers. Their confidence level goes up a lot. This does take some collaboration because it requires you to talk to the gen ed teacher or a math coach and say, like, what's one lesson, one standard each week that's being covered that I should focus on. Now I'm saying, all right, majority of my time, you notice, is spent on the prerequisite standards that are still connected to grade level, but I'm doing that, say, 3 days a week. Every day I'm doing a fluency activity. And Eureka, actually, I'm not going to go to it now, but Eureka has some, for every grade level, has one fluency standard that's most important. So that's probably where I'm going to be spending my time. And now, on Friday, it's going to become my progress monitoring day, where I'm going to say, I'm doing this every other week, but I give them the math probe. And then I'm breaking students up into 2 groups. If they didn't master the standard, they're going to be in a reteach group, right? And you can do that, of course, with them directly, or you can always assign like a Khan Academy or iReady lesson if you use any of those platforms. The other group is going to be, I'm spiraling in previously taught ones, and so I'm going to assign those students or work with them on a previously taught standard. And then, and you can kind of mix in, I have in here, like if you want to do like a fun Friday fluency activities, like fluency games to make it a little more exciting, you can also add that to the mix. So I just went through that really quickly, but hopefully it gives you some clarity in how you could fit the pieces together. But I want to stamp again, it's so easy in math intervention to get confused. There's so much coming at you. Again, you don't have a scope and sequence. Lots of times you don't have a curriculum. So you're having to make a million decisions, right? So if you're getting lost, zoom back out and say, like, for this grade level, what's most important? Where do I want the student to be by the end of the year? And then use that to then make the decision. So again, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. All right, last slide here really is our resources. Everything that's got a blue border around it has a link embedded. So when you get this, it's got links. So there's a blank week at a glance, the sample one that I gave you. So you can look at that a little more detailed. These are the coherence map and the grade level focus, focus documents. There's a Common Core Mathematics Companion. Teachers love it. There's a K2 one, 3, 5, and 6, 8. And my favorite part of it, there's a student misconception section. So if you're like, what's the common mistakes students make on this standard? You can kind of then anticipate what those mistakes are and plan for that. These are assessments at Elastic. You can make those exit tickets pre-test or post-tests. Here's a folder of K5 fluency activities. Here's a folder. This is, if you're using Engage New York or Eureka, I don't know if either of y'all are using that, it's all free. That's the last thing I'll show you, then we'll move on because I know I'm running a few minutes over. Within here, this is actually, I got this from the Charter Growth Fund. I need to go back and look at the links here because it's giving me a hard time. But if you use Engage in New York or Eureka, it's like incredibly comprehensive resource, especially if you're virtual. Give me one moment, my computer is working slowly. Okay, well, let me move to the next tab. So this is what it looks like. I'm not gonna go into all of them. I think I just wanna point out, they actually have lesson videos embedded in here. They have a homework link. You can go into assessments and sign students things. It's pretty incredible resource. So I definitely would recommend checking that out. So there's some other resources. I'm not going to go into it, but just for sake of time, I've covered a lot. All I'm going to say is dream big, but start small. Most of all starts. Just pick one thing you can do differently based on what you've heard today. So thank you for coming. Next week, on October 23rd, we'll be covering Juicy Sentences, which is a reading comprehension strategy. So hopefully we can see you then. Thanks for coming.